that's a pretty chilling statement, didn't you? Because this is a guy who actually knows it. This is a man who's his personal lawyer. Did you hear the question, everybody? This is his personal lawyer. Before that, an executive of the Trump Organization, and also a former deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee. Like a guy who's actually been in the infrastructure of our politics, saying that he fears there wouldn't be a peaceful transition of power. I think that the best response we have to that is to get more comfortable with the idea of holding Trump to account, not less, right? Because a bully, and that's what he was saying, right? A bully with scary powers and the ability to perhaps draw people into supporting that. A bully doesn't respond to weakness. A bully responds to strength. And so, to my mind, it makes this year, this time, separate from the election process, all the more vital. The deconstructing of Donald Trump now, the full realization of who he is and what he is now, makes it less likely, A, that he runs for re-election. And I know people are like, you're like, oh, Trump will never stand down. With all due respect, I am in the Alec Baldwin school on this. And you're at, like about 3 weeks ago, Alec Baldwin is playing Trump, and he's like talking about something, and so he's like brings up some sort of thing, he says, and then my miserable hell of being president will be done. You know, the truth of the matter is that I think Donald Trump is a incredibly, so it's Trump calling now to say I'm better than that. Yeah. You know, he does that all the time. He's always texting, you know, and stuff. But no, the thing of it is, I think that Donald Trump is an incredibly narcissistic and self-serving, self-absorbed man. And I think there is a real possibility that he stands down if he thinks he's going to lose, and also that there is a real possibility that he takes a deal if he thinks it keeps him out of trouble. And I just think this is Donald Trump. I do not see him as a strong, evil mastermind. I didn't believe, and I don't think this is the meanest thing I've ever said to anybody, I don't think he's half the man that Dick Cheney is. And so, that comes around you from behind and bites you. But I'll stand on that. And so the answer to it is not to be frightened, right? And not to speculate, oh, Trump might do this, Trump might do that. It is to redouble our efforts to hold him to account at this point. I will tell you, the biggest fear I have is not about the transition of power, it is about the vulnerability of our election systems. I think our election systems in this country are incredibly vulnerable. I cannot believe that we have not, as a country, gone to verifiable paper ballots in every district in the country, universal. And Congressman Mark Pocan and a couple other members of Congress have a bill that would declare our election system a public utility, because our electrical utilities are protected by all sorts of federal programs that make sure that you can't mess with their computers and stuff, right? We just want to make sure that, you know, nobody's blowing up a power plant. Well, shouldn't we make sure that nobody blows up our elections? And so my second answer to your question is, I don't worry as much about like mid-November of 2020. I worry about mid-October of 2020. So I would redouble your efforts to get Democrats and Republicans to support security for our election system going into this race. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, there you go.
So obviously you're talking about a major conspiracy against the President of the United States, this being the Democrats.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen?
The electorate.
The electorate. What's going
This state of emergency thing, you know, we joke a little bit about the accountability stuff. We talk about impeachment, which I think is a serious issue. I think Trump should be impeached for doing the state of emergency. I think it's a stunning abuse of his power. Now, I don't say that casually. The fact of the matter is that taking your tax dollars to build a wall that is not needed and that will not work for the purposes he says, and that the Congress of the United States said, we don't want to do this. A president being able to declare that is a kingly power. That is a monarchical choice. That is the choice of an elected despot, not a elected president of the United States. Now, these people say, well, we've had 39 emergencies. Some of them are still in the books. Jimmy Carter said, something about Iran, 40 years ago. True. And you know what? I think there are probably some emergencies along the way that shouldn't have been done. I'll even go so far as to say I think Barack Obama probably did some things that we shouldn't have let him do. I think there's plenty of people that did things we shouldn't have let him do. That doesn't justify letting this guy do this, because this is not comparable. There is no emergency. There is no crisis. He's taking our money and spending it for purposes for which it wasn't allocated. And I will tell you something. Get scared about that. Because, in my opinion, when George Washington chopped down the cherry tree, they had to do something with the wood, right? So they made a little box, right? You make a nice little box. When George Washington was president of the United States, he put the powers of the presidency in that little box and he handed it off to John Adams. John Adams put a few more powers in, Alien and Sedition Acts and all sorts of stuff like that. He hands it off to Jefferson. Jefferson, to his immense credit, took a couple powers out. Then his vice president shot the former Secretary of the Treasury, and they had to change some other things and put some more powers in. By the time you get to James Madison and a little more, well, now they got rid of the box about 100 years ago. When you become president of the United States, they drive a semi-tractor trailer full of powers up to the White House, right? Our presidents are so imperial and so powerful, it's way out of control. We don't declare wars anymore. We don't check and balance our presidents. Trump is possible in part because we have let the presidency become so all-powerful. And if we let presidents of the United States, Democrats or Republicans, start to say, oh, I couldn't get what I wanted to spend tax money on, so I'm declaring an emergency to go spend that money. If we let that power stand and it goes on to the next president of the United States, then I'm going to tell you, at some point, President Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is going to declare a climate emergency, which I'm going to be enthusiastic about, but my Republican friends are not going to like. And the fact of the matter is, truthfully, this is a very big deal. Now, when you get to the declaration of an emergency that cancels an election or something like that, I don't think he'll do it. I don't think he would. And if he did, I have to believe that the United States Senate at that point would stand up to him. And I know, I see my friend shaking her head, and I see this distrust, and I understand what you're saying. If I'm wrong, then we have to go to the streets that day, my friends. Yeah. That's not a debatable point. I believe in peaceful protests, not violent protests, and I know all the challenges of it. The fact of the matter is, we didn't cancel an election in the Civil War in 1864. Abraham Lincoln was terrified. Abraham Lincoln was terrified he was going to get beaten for re-election. He made the worst mistake of his life. He replaced a good vice president with an awful, miserable, drunk Andrew Johnson who screwed up Reconstruction. And so his fear actually harmed us. Franklin Roosevelt, in 1944, in the midst of World War II, was dealing with a horrible circumstance. And we had hundreds of millions of voters who were out of place, they're overseas and stuff like that. They still held the election. I'm writing a history of the Democratic Party, looking at that 1944 election. One of the biggest issues of the 1944 election was how you were going to get all the Americans who were overseas to vote, how you could allow them to vote. People are defending the country because they were so far afield. And it was really difficult. It would have been easy for Roosevelt to say, you know what? We're probably going to win this war this year, and then we have the election next year, right? Roosevelt didn't do that, didn't even ponder it. We have never, ever done it. We didn't do it in 1812 when the British were literally lobbing bombs at the White House. And so I think I'm hoping that we can see it through without any problem. And in fact, I have to believe that that's the bridge too far. I hope I'm right.
First of all, thank you, John. I feel better.
Good. That is why I came here tonight. I said there's going to be a guy in the far corner
Impeachment.
Okay, that's a very good question. Now, who's your congressperson? Who is it? Okay. That may be a little hard. No, look, here's what I will tell you. This is an important thing to understand. Keep your eye on the Republicans, not on the Democrats. Keep your eye on the Republicans. How many of you watched the whole Michael Cohen testimony? Oh my gosh, these are my people. Hey, like you got your Michael Cohen, t-shirts, and you got your Dakota rings, and it's like you sent away, you got off the cereal box, you're all into this. I love you people. Now here's the thing. If you watch the whole Michael Cohen thing, number one, you saw Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez ask some pretty damning and good questions, right? They're like, they keep saying this young woman from New York, she should just be quiet and stuff like that. Actually, every time she speaks up, it gets better. But the most interesting thing about the hearing was that late along the way, they got to Justin Amash, the Republican congressman from Southwest Michigan. And Justin Amash, not only reasonable, he actually asked some relatively damning questions. He went into some core issues. Now, he didn't do it the way that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did. He didn't do everything I might have wanted him to do. But there are a handful of Republicans. They are constitutional conservatives. And you want to watch them. You want to amplify them. Number one. So that's what you do. Learn about that so you can talk. You say even Republicans are starting to ask some tough questions here. And there are. Remember, you guys all love them now because they're on MSNBC, but look at how many former Republican strategists are on MSNBC now saying this is the most dangerous man in the world, right? So you want to gather that and amplify it. It helps to build backbone in people. And then the other thing is, watch the way that Jerry Nadler does this. Watch the way that Jerry Nadler does this. What he will do, in my opinion, is he will slowly make the case and he will work very, very hard to build a consensus around some necessary acts. Remember, impeachment is not removal from office. The Senate has to do that. But the process of impeachment is to put the issues on the table and open up a debate. And it's fair to say to people, what do you fear about that debate? What causes you to be cautious about that debate? Is there something you think is going to come out? Is there something you think is going to be revealed? So as you talk to your member of Congress, what you want to do is soften them up on this issue. You want to get them opened up on it. And the incredible thing about it, what's amazing to me, is look at where the discussion is today as opposed to a week ago. Look at where the discussion is today as opposed to a month ago. Look at where it is today as opposed to a year ago. The fact of the matter is, I was on MSNBC this morning with Alex Witt, right? And our whole discussion was about impeachment. And it wasn't some, over-the-top, out-there thing. It was like, we've gotten to a point where if the President of the United States is guilty of obstruction of justice, then he has committed an act that Richard Nixon was, in fact, impeached for by the committee, not the whole of Congress. If he has conspired to violate campaign finance laws, the exact thing that Michael Cohen talked about, that's what Richard Nixon was impeached for by the committee in the second article of impeachment. And the interesting thing about it is, every one of those articles of impeachment against Richard Nixon, Republicans voted for. Not just Democrats, Republicans as well. And so, has our Republican Party become more, I think, sad and tragic? Yes, it's very sad, it's very tragic. But our job is to always demand that you got to speak to those better angels. And so, watch what the Republicans are doing. Watch how Jerry Nadler does it. Read a good book on impeachment. I wrote the introduction to a book called The Constitution Demands It. Makes a fine holiday gift. And learn it, get smart, go out, you'll be very convincing. Because you made me love you by saying that I made you feel better. Yes, right straight through Arizona. Now, you know that the fact of the matter is, retaking the Senate isn't all that hard. Truthfully, the weird thing is, 2018 was the worst imaginable year for Democrats in the U.S. It was just a nightmare scenario. You were coming off the 2012 election when Democrats had done really, really well. And so 2018, it was like you had nothing going for you. It was a very, very hard map. And yet, amazingly enough, and you were some law, you had a couple of fallbacks, but you actually picked up a couple of seats, right? Where did you pick seats up? Out in this wild Netherland of the West. Arizona and Nevada, right? Now, what I want to emphasize to you is that in 2020, you're going to be fighting Senate races coming off the 2014 election, which, by the way, was a Republican wave election. And so, as we talk about the path to retaking the U.S. Senate, there are many, many more viable seats in play. I do believe the Arizona seat, and I'm not saying this casually, I think it's generally, is like very high on the list. It's one of the top handful on the list. But I also tell you this, Democrats in 2020 should run their best possible candidate in every Senate race across the country. They should not pass on any of these. They should run Stacey Abrams in the state of Georgia for that U.S. Senate seat, because if it's ever going to be won, it can be won in 2020. If Beto O'Rourke doesn't run for president, he ought to run for that Senate seat from Texas. You got to get your very best candidates out there, your most dynamic candidates, and you got to fill every one of these races. When we talk, again, I started in Arizona, but there's a bunch of states across the country. Why I say this is because I'm not insincere in this. I believe the wheels are coming off Donald Trump's presidency. I think it is unraveling. I think that the Republican Party is in a state of crisis, and that crisis will get worse no matter what happens with Trump this year, because some of these people they will be as absurd as Jim Jordan was at the Michael Cohen here, and that will haunt them. And so, I will only tell you that the route is to get your best candidates into every one of these races, all across the country, and to understand the story, and I will tell it very quickly, of John Race. John Race was do you remember John Race? You're nodding over there, a couple of weeks. John Race was a mechanic, a member of the Machinists Union in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. And in 1964, he was on the county board in Fond du Lac County, and they said to John Race, we don't have a candidate for Congress in the 6th district because the Republicans are so popular here. It's such a powerful, great district, and we need a candidate. Will you run? And John Race says, well, I'm getting some overtime at the machine shop, and so I can't really campaign, but if it's just put my name on the ballot, yeah, I'm a good Democrat, I'll do it. And he put his name on the ballot, and on election night, because Lyndon Johnson swept to an amazing landslide, and Democrats did great all over the country, John Race was at the victory party for the Democrats, and he cheered when Johnson won and Humphrey became vice president. He cheered when Bill Proxmire got reelected to the U.S. Senate, and he was about to go home because he was on first shift the next morning, and somebody said, John, did you look at that total? Because you just got elected to the United States Congress because you took the slot. And John Race went to Washington, D.C., and he voted to create Medicare and Medicaid. He voted for the Voting Rights Act, and he voted to start the war on poverty. And he got beaten the next election, but damn, that was a good term.
All right, we'll take one more question, and that will be it. What's that?
I'll take a man and a woman, then we're out of here. All right.
We tend to treat symptoms rather than the disease. Treat the symptom.
I think that's a great question. Basically, treating symptoms rather than treating disease. And in fact, I would argue, and I'd be very tough on you here tonight, I'd argue that's been the crisis of the Democratic Party for the last number of years. And it has damaged the Democratic Party. Now, I'll give you one example of symptom and disease. When you lose the presidency in 2000, even though you won the popular vote, but the Electoral College takes away the presidency from you because the Supreme Court intervened, you might want to, the next time you have the presidency in both houses of Congress, address the Electoral College, because then you might have 16 years later, you win the presidency by 3 million votes, and you still lose it. And so, being a structuralist, being serious about structure matters. And what you're saying is exactly right on the minimum wage. It's right on a whole host of things. The American people, especially younger voters, they're like, why don't young people come to meetings, right? Well, young people, amazingly enough, will come to meetings if they think it's about a big, big deal. But they don't always come to meetings if it's about an incremental little thing. And so, for the Democrats, one of the things they have to figure out, a lot of people portray this as a left-right fight. Who's, you're going to be socialist, or you're going to be moderate, or whatever, stuff like that. I don't think that's what it is. I think what it is the Democratic Party a party of great, big ideas about solving problems that have remained unsolved for too long? And if the Democratic Party is that, you will win over voters not merely for one election, right? It won't be whipsawed back and forth. You can win them for a generation. You can win them for a long period of time. There is a reason why Democrats still default to Franklin Roosevelt. It is because Franklin Roosevelt was the best president of the last 100 years. He really was, because you're in the middle of a scorching depression, and it's awful, and people, your dad is selling apples to survive on the street, and Franklin Roosevelt comes in, gives your dad a job, gets the farm back, and brings rural electrification out to your house. And the fact is, that is not shooting around the edges. That's going to the heart of the matter. And there are people who voted for Franklin Roosevelt in rural Oklahoma, for the next 50 years, right? Even though there was another Democrat, it worked. And so, one of the things for the Democratic Party is to figure out what are the fundamental problems that need to be addressed and get serious about addressing them. That is why the Green New Deal is a big deal. And I am not here to tell you that the Green New Deal is easy, or that it will necessarily be popular. You have to work around it. You have to deal with these things. That is why taxing the rich is something that has a viability. The weird thing about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is that here she shows up, and everybody's like, whoa, she's scary, right? Or she's this, or she's that. Right? And then they're like, oh, we just caught her. She said something crazy, that we should save the planet. And nobody's going to be for that. And then they poll it, and everybody's like, you know what? I think saving the planet's a pretty good idea. And then she says, oh, maybe we have to have a 70% tax on the rich. She's not as radical as Eisenhower, but, she's kind of into taxing the rich. And everybody's like, oh my God, like hair's on fire. She's going to tax the rich. Oh, it's terrifying. Oh no, everything's going to fall apart. And then they poll on it, and people are like, only 70%? Can't we just take it all? And so the fact of the matter is that a cautious Democratic Party that doesn't go to the heart of the matter, indexing the minimum wage, dealing with fundamental issues, and don't limit yourself, right? We live in this incredibly wonderful, highly developed Western society, right? Like, why shouldn't the Democratic Party say, yeah, we're the party that's going to cure cancer in 10 years? No, I'm not kidding. Why not run on that? Why not say, yeah, that's research money and believing in science and going all in, because why should people still be dying of cancer? Right? It is, why shouldn't we be in favor of saying that health care is a right and no child is ever going to be lacking care because it costs too much money? You get to the heart of the matter on these issues, and some of them will be hard. And I know you can't promise everything in every election, but I will tell you this, promise you this. If Bill Clinton, in 1993, instead of that health care plan that he did, which no one could understand, right? It was complicated and convoluted. It was heart in the right place, but boy, it was like 10,000 pages. If Bill Clinton had proposed single-payer, Medicare for all, health care is a right, no child will go without care, in 1993, he might well have gotten beaten. He might have lost that fight, right? But he lost for the big 1,100-page thing, right? If he had fought for something big and real, he might have lost that year. and then he would have run on it in 96, and he would have gotten reelected in 96, and he might have even lost on it again. But I promise you, we would have single-payer Medicare for all health care now in this country if Democrats had fought for it in 1993. It is as simple as that. And so, find an issue, not every issue. Don't make it, I'm not telling you to go off the deep end. Find some issues, fight for them, be willing to lose. Because the weird thing is, when Franklin Roosevelt did the New Deal, every single idea he implemented was an idea that Democrats and progressives and sometimes socialists had fought for before and lost on. But when the moment came, we loved him for it. And the fact of the matter is, I think we're in a moment where people really want big solutions. Big solutions to big problems. Thank you.
I like you, and so do a lot of other people in this room, and we really like the way you think. And I do not want you to get out of this room without giving us some clues about some of the Democratic candidates running for president that you think we ought to be really looking at seriously.
Okay, so you want to talk about the pure punditry of this thing. Okay, we'll do it quickly because I know it's a long, dark night. And we all have to get home and get a good night's rest because you're going to want to be right there watching Jerry Nadler bring down those 60 subpoenas tomorrow morning. I know you're gonna have one of those like 60 bingo thing, you know, yep, oh, there's obstruction of justice. Oh, Donald Trump Jr., got him. So I realize that tomorrow's going to be a big day for you, so we'll do it a little bit quickly. Cory Booker is the best speaker of the bunch. Most capable public speaker of the bunch. Most inspiring speaker of the bunch. If you can get him for next year's dinner, go for it. He is really, really good at going in front of a crowd and inspiring them. He's also really, really smart because he has made himself the top expert among the candidates on farm issues. He's way out in front of breaking up agricultural monopolies and stuff like that. And you say to yourself, why would a guy from Newark be interested in farm issues? What about the Democratic race for the presidency involves farms? Where is the first caucus? And you go, Iowa. Okay. So Cory Booker is going to surprise people. He's going to do better than people expect because A, people are going to be wowed by what an effective communicator he is, and they're going to be impressed by the ideas he has put in play. Number one. Number two, I know that there's people in this room who do not like Kirsten Gillibrand because she was mean to Al Franken. No, believe me, I've been to Minnesota. I have heard it, man. There are some blood oaths up there, man. Oh, jeez. And it's not pretty. But I will tell you this, Kirsten Gillibrand is tough. She is the toughest person running for president. By far, the toughest of the whole bunch. When James Mattis was nominated for Secretary of Defense, he got every vote in the Senate except for Kirsten Gillibrand. She voted no. She didn't do it to make some show. She did it because she said that our Constitution establishes civilian control of the military. We shouldn't have generals rotating into leadership of the military. She stands on principle and she does things that really piss people off sometimes, but she's a very, very strong woman. And I can tell you this, if I'm wrong about Donald Trump and he ends up in that debate, and Kirsten Gillibrand is debating him, she will shred him. I mean, she will destroy him. And so, keep conscious of that. Elizabeth Warren is putting the best ideas out of any candidate running right now. She is literally running for president as who she is, and that is like this incredibly smart person who, give me a problem, I find a solution. If you watch what she's come up with on, for instance, guaranteed daycare, so you want to talk about an issue that gets young women excited? I tell you, like through the roof excited, what she's doing, so everybody's like, oh, why would you spend a week talking about daycare? Because daycare is a real issue that energizes people, and Elizabeth Warren is mounting a campaign based on a core set of ideas. She's doing a really good job of it, and it's worthy of watching. Kamala Harris is a remarkable combination of a lot of the things that we ultimately want in a president of the United States. She is the child of immigrants, and she has lived around the world. She is multiracial, multi-ethnic. She has been a prosecutor. Some people think she's been too tough a prosecutor at times, but she has a strength, and if you watched her during the Kavanaugh hearings, right, she is an incredibly effective thinker on her feet, and is very strong in how she does stuff, and she seems to have tapped into something where she's getting a lot of people on her side. Amy Klobuchar should not eat salad with a fork. Or with a Coke. Yeah. And she's gotten a really rough rap of late. What I can tell you about Amy Klobuchar is this. My daughter and her daughter go to the same camp in upper Minnesota. And I've sat around campfires with Amy Klobuchar, and I've never seen her be mean. Now, I understand that she's getting wrapped, but with all due respect, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to speak French, and some of you don't understand French, and I respect that, but basically the attacks on her have been bullshit. I mean, it's just stupid, okay? There are plenty of men who are lousy bosses who are great presidents. Lyndon Johnson gave us the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, the war on poverty, and he was an awful person, okay? So the fact of the matter is, get over it. Klobuchar is actually pretty impressive, and she's doing a decent job of it. Bernie Sanders. You know the truth about Bernie Sanders? Right now, if the election was today, he would win. He would win the race, because young people remain as excited about Bernie Sanders. All evidence is they were. I don't know if anybody saw his announcement event yesterday. It was stunning. It was a huge crowd, and it was really young and really energetic. And the fact of the matter is that I traveled with him last fall, and he is full of energy. He may be heading toward 80, but I just drove down here with my mom, who's 87, and she just went through the whole book fest and handled everything and jumped up every step and ran every place she needed to run. And so with all due respect, don't do the age thing on me. Sanders is going to be very, very viable. He may or may not. I don't know how far he'll get, but there's a lot going on with him. Joe Biden. Joe Biden may decide to make this race. And if he does, he will start as a front runner, and he is very popular with a lot of people, but I really do think, I have my doubts about whether this is a race that he should run. I would say that bluntly, I like him very much, but I have my doubts about whether this is a race he's run. Last person I'll talk about, I haven't even begun to get through half of them. And then I'll tell you what I think, okay? And I'll be very honest with you, as honest as I can be. Pete Buttigieg, who none of you have ever heard of, is the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. I don't know whether you're applauding South Bend or in fact Buttigieg, but he is, I've been following him, and he is quite amazing. He is super sharp, super strong, very young, quite impressive. And he's got lots of ideas and a real boldness. He's very, very good at explaining things in ways that are appealing to people. Frankly, he's not bad. There's a lot going on there, things to be paid attention to. The candidate who I don't know that he'll run, but the candidate I think who could well be the most viable contender for the presidency in 2020 is Sherrod Brown. I'm not here to endorse Sherrod or to pump him up. I'm just telling you that Sherrod Brown is a remarkable person, just an amazing person. And he's thinking of running, and I honestly believe, I know it's a rare thing in American politics, I honestly believe he's trying to figure out whether he should run. Like, he's literally going and meeting with people, and he's not sure. But the one thing to understand is I used to work in Ohio. I covered him when he was Secretary of State of Ohio. And this is the kind of guy who, right, everybody talks about voting rights and getting people registered to vote. he convinced McDonald's to put the registration forms on the trays at McDonald's so that you could fill it out while you're having your Big Mac. And to this day in Ohio, there are in county voter registrar offices, there are like ketchup-stained voter registration forms. That's the kind of guy, he's a very quite remarkable guy. And I will tell you, I'll close off with a Sherrod Brown story. Again, I'm not here to push him. I really like Bernie. I've known him for a long time. I've got a lot of affection for him. I happen to be super impressed by, frankly, I'll go another way of saying it. I just think that a woman should be president, period. And so I'm very impressed by some of the women that are running, and but I'll tell you a Sherrod story just to complete. And that is, Sherrod Brown, I knew him when he was a congressman, and he's very, very anti-war. He's one of the most anti-war people in Congress, for what it's worth. He's incredibly courageous, standing up against the Iraq War and things like that. He's got all sorts of nuances to him. He looks kind of a little bit schlumpy. The suit doesn't always look perfect. He's a Russian scholar from Yale. He's incredibly brilliant and all that stuff like this. But he is very in touch. He came up from this little town called Mansfield, Ohio, right? And he's really imbued of that sensibility and that culture. He believes in spending time with working people, sitting at the tables where they eat, being in their offices and in their workplaces and stuff like that. And Sherrod told me a story back from when he was campaigning for Al Gore in 2000. And he was at an auto plant in Lorain, Ohio, and he went around the table with all these guys. And he said, well, what do you think about Al Gore? The first guy goes, I'm not for Al Gore. I don't like him because he is in favor of abortion. He wants to kill babies. Go to the next guy. What do you think about Al Gore? So I don't like Al Gore because he's for the gays. He wants to give it all away to the gays. I don't like him. Go to the next guy. I don't like Al Gore because he's going to take away our guns. He's going to take our guns away from us. I'm not going to vote for Al Gore. And Sherrod leans back as their congressman, who's been incredibly militant on trade issues, on economic justice issues, on union issues all the years. He leans back and he says, well, you don't like Al Gore because he's for abortion rights. And you don't like Al Gore because he's for the gays. And you don't like Al Gore because he wants to take away the guns. Well, I'm for all those things. And to a man, everybody around the table looked at him like he was crazy. And they said, yeah, we know, but you're on our side. If you want to understand why Sherrod Brown is such an interesting person, this is a guy who has a 100% record of supporting gay rights. A guy who has a 100% record of supporting abortion rights. A guy who has stood up against war after war after war. A guy who has fought for women's rights, who has fought on all the issues, all of the progressive issues, and yet he can get a table of guys who are the swing voters that you're sometimes afraid of, who will say, but you're on our side. And the fact of the matter is, I don't necessarily think he's the only one that can do that, but I will tell you he is somebody I have seen do that, and it's pretty amazing. You are a wonderful group of people. Thanks for having me tonight.